It costs more to get you to notice a product than it does to make it. For most consumer goods sold today, the marketing budget is larger than the manufacturing budget. The thing in your hand cost $1 to build and $4 to convince you to want. Over the next 20 minutes, you'll learn why that's not a scam, what actually happens in the gap between a product existing and you buying it, and why the most powerful idea in this entire field is the one that says the customer was right before you ever opened your mouth. A marketing degree takes 4 years and around $140,000. This takes 20 minutes. Welcome to Skip the Degree. Here's the first thing they get wrong, and almost everyone gets it wrong. Marketing is not advertising. Advertising is the loud part. The thing you see, the thing you skip, the thing you resent. But advertising is maybe the last 10% of marketing, the visible tip of something much larger and much quieter. Marketing is the entire decision of what to make, for whom, at what price, sold where, described how. The ad is just the part that shouts. By the time you see an ad, 90% of the marketing has already happened in rooms you'll never enter, in decisions made before the product existed. Take the snack you grabbed this week. Someone decided its exact weight in grams because a bag that feels too light in your palm signals cheap. Someone decided it would sit at eye level on the third shelf because that's where your gaze lands without effort, and that shelf space was fought over and paid for like beachfront property. Someone decided the crunch should be loud because food scientists know a louder crunch tastes fresher to your brain. None of that is advertising. All of it is marketing. The ad you skipped was the cheap part. Picture Josiah Wedgwood in the 1760s. English potter, clubfoot, lost a leg to smallpox, rode to his workshop on a wooden stump every morning and obsessed over something nobody in his trade thought about. Who was buying? He noticed that if the Queen bought his pottery, everyone wanted it. So he begged a royal endorsement, slapped Potter to Her Majesty on his wares, renamed a whole product line Queen's Ware, and watched ordinary shopkeepers and farmers' wives pay extra for the exact same clay because now it meant something. Wedgwood wasn't selling pottery. He was selling the feeling of being slightly above your station, the quiet thrill of eating dinner off the same pattern as a duchess. He even opened showrooms in fashionable London streets where the wealthy would gather, deliberately showed his finest pieces to the aristocracy first, and let demand trickle downward. Inventing the idea that you make the powerful want it and everyone else will follow. That's marketing. The clay never changed. 260 years before Instagram, a one-legged potter had already figured out the influencer. So hold this in your head because it reframes the whole field. Marketing is not the art of making people want things. It's the art of finding what people already want and standing in the right place when they reach for it. The good marketers are not magicians, they're closer to anthropologists who happen to have a budget. Which brings us to the second idea, and this one is the foundation everything else sits on. There's a thing called the marketing concept, and it sounds boring until you realize it inverted an entire economy. For most of human history, business worked one direction. You make a thing, then you go find people to sell it to. Make, then sell. Henry Ford famously offered any color you liked as long as it was black because the factory came first and the customer came second. Production led, desire followed. The assembly line decided and you took what it gave you. Then, somewhere in the 1950s in the bloated abundance of post-war America, that flipped. Suddenly there were too many products and not enough want. Factories that had been built to churn out tanks and rifles were now churning out toasters and cars and pastel refrigerators, and they could make anything. Picture a 1955 supermarket, aisles that didn't exist a decade earlier, 14 brands of cereal where there used to be one, every box screaming for a housewife's glance. The shelves were full. The problem was the humans standing in front of them, who only had 2 hands and 1 stomach. The bottleneck was no longer production. It was attention. It was desire. It was the customer's actual life. And a handful of thinkers said something that sounds obvious now and was heresy then. What if we find out what people want first and then make that? Find out first, then make. The whole arrow reversed. That's the marketing concept, and it is the hinge the entire modern discipline swings on. The customer is not the end of the production line. The customer is the beginning. Everything you've ever been taught about the customer is always right is a folk memory of this one intellectual revolution. The moment business stopped asking, how do we sell what we made? And started asking, what should we have made? It is the difference between a company that ships a product and prays and a company that knows the product will sell because it asked first. Now the third concept, and it's the one you've half heard of and probably mangled, the 4 Ps: product, price, place, promotion, Every intro textbook leads with this, usually as a dead little list you memorize for an exam and forget by August. But the 4 Ps aren't a list. They're the 4 levers a marketer can actually pull, and the entire job is choosing which one to pull and how hard. A product is what it is. Price is what you charge, which is never just about cost. A $1,200 phone and a $40 phone often cost nearly the same handful of dollars to assemble. Place is how it reaches you. Which is why Coca-Cola's real genius was never the recipe, but the company's century-old vow to put itself within arm's reach of every human on Earth. They will tell you the goal was to make the drink available wherever a person might feel thirsty, which is a polite way of saying everywhere a human can stand. You can buy a Coke at a glacier base camp and in a war zone. The recipe is guessable. The distribution took 100 years and is almost impossible to copy. And promotion is the shouting. The part everyone thinks is the whole job. Pull one lever, the others shift. Drop the price, you change what the product means. A luxury handbag at half off isn't a deal. It's a contradiction, and the brand knows it, which is why the truly expensive ones would rather burn unsold stock than discount it. The levers are connected. That's the craft. Here's the part that should unsettle you a little. In 1990, a professor named Robert Lauterborn looked at the 4 Ps and said, "These are all from the seller's side of the table. Product, price, place, promotion. Every one of them describes what the company does. None of them describe what the customer experiences. So he flipped each one. Product became customer need. Nobody wants a drill, they want a hole in the wall, and really they want a shelf, and really they want a tidy home, and really they want to feel like someone who has their life together. Price became total cost, not just money, but the time, the effort, the embarrassment of getting it wrong in front of people whose opinion you care about. Place became convenience. Promotion became communication, which is a conversation, not a megaphone. The 4 Ps seen from the only chair that matters, yours. And this is where marketing stops being about products at all and starts being about something far stranger, meaning. We'll come back to that because it explains why people tattoo company logos on their bodies, which, when you say it out loud, is genuinely insane. Let's talk about the moment the field broke its own rules, because it happened more than once, and each break made the previous era look naive. The first rupture is segmentation, and it sounds technical until you see what it actually did to the world. For decades, the dream was the mass market, one product, one message, everybody. Ford's black car. One size fits all. Then marketers realized the mass market was a fiction. There is no everybody. There's a 19-year-old in Sao Paulo and a retired teacher in Osaka, and they do not want the same toothpaste for the same reasons. So the field shattered the audience into segments, by age, by income, by geography, and eventually by something far more intimate. By values, by lifestyle, by who you think you are when you look in the mirror. The cleanest proof of this is a brand that sells the same brown sugar water to 2 people who would never sit at the same table. The teenager buys the energy drink because it signals rebellion and late nights. The marathon runner buys the electrolyte version because it signals discipline and dawn. Same factory, same shelf. 2 completely different stories sold to 2 completely different selves. The product is a constant. The meaning is the variable. Segmentation is just the science of figuring out which story to whisper to which person. Here's where it gets personal. The reason your phone seems to know you, the ad for the exact thing you mentioned out loud yesterday, is segmentation taken to its logical extreme. The segment used to be 1 million people. Now the segment is 1, you. A market of a single person profiled in enough detail that the message can be aimed at you specifically, at the hour you're most likely to be tired and weak-willed and holding your credit card. Whether that's a miracle or a surveillance nightmare depends on the day you're having, probably both. The second rupture is branding, and this is the one that should genuinely bend your mind. A brand is not a logo. A brand is a memory structure in your head that a company doesn't own but spent millions to build. Think about it. Coca-Cola's factories could burn down tomorrow and the company would be fine because its most valuable asset isn't in any building. It's the warm, slightly nostalgic feeling that fires in your brain when you see that specific red. Some accountants estimate that feeling is worth over $80 billion. $80 billion of pure association, living rent-free in the collective human skull. You did the building, they kept the asset, and here's the eerie proof. In blind taste tests, people often prefer the cheaper cola until you show them the labels, at which point their actual reported pleasure flips to match the famous one. Brain scans have caught this happening in real time. The logo doesn't just change what you choose, it changes what you taste. The brand reaches past your wallet and edits your senses. A brand is the only asset a company keeps inside your mind instead of on its books. Notice the pattern here because it's the secret arc of the whole discipline. Each era thought it had found the real thing. make the best product. No, find the customer. No, segment the customer. No, own a feeling in the customer's mind. Each layer made the previous one look quaint, and every generation of marketers was certain they'd reach the bottom. None of them had. Yours won't either. Which brings us to the third rupture, and it's still happening to you right now. Today, this minute, the collapse of the marketer's control. For a century, marketing was a broadcast. One company, one message, blasted at a passive audience that could only listen. Then the audience got microphones. Now a single bad review, a single video of a guitar getting broken by an airline that refused to pay for it, a single tweet at 2 in the morning can do more damage than a company can repair with a $100 million campaign. That guitar video, by the way, has been watched over 20 million times, and the airline stock wobbled the week it went viral. The arrow reversed again. The customer, who was once the silent end of the production line, now talks back, and worse, talks to each other. This is why a teenager with a phone and a grudge can be more powerful than a marketing department with a skyscraper. The megaphone got handed to the crowd, and the smartest companies did something counterintuitive in response. They stopped trying to control the conversation and started trying to deserve a good one. Some now reply to angry customers in public on purpose because a complaint answered well in front of an audience is worth more than the complaint never happening. The old goal was to broadcast a flawless image. The new goal is to be caught behaving well when you didn't have to. And companies that still think they're broadcasting are getting eaten alive by companies that understand they're now in a conversation they don't control and never will again. Here's the "this is your life" moment. Every time you trust a stranger's review over an ad, you are the rupture. You personally are why the old model died. The most powerful marketing force on earth right now isn't a company. It's other people who bought the thing before you, sitting at home telling the truth for free. Word of mouth, the oldest marketing channel, older than writing, older than money, turns out to be the one the digital age made unstoppable. Let me give you the framework to take home, the thing you can say at dinner tomorrow and sound like you understand marketing better than most people who do it for a living. Strip away the jargon and all of marketing reduces to 3 forces: intention. 3, hold on to these. Here's the first force: attention. Attention is the scarcest resource in the modern economy, and the numbers are brutal. The average person sees somewhere between 4,000 and 10,000 marketing messages a day. You are conscious of almost none of them. Picture every ad you've been exposed to today as a single grain of rice. By lunchtime, you'd be standing in a pile up to your knees, and you'd remember maybe 3 grains. That's the war, not for your wallet, for 1 second of your notice. And the second-order consequence is everywhere. It's why everything is louder, faster, more outrageous than it was 10 years ago. Why headlines scream and thumbnails shout, because in a knee-deep pile of rice, the only grain that survives is the one on fire. But that fire has a cost downstream. When everyone shouts, nobody is believed, and the screaming that won attention this year quietly poisons the trust a brand needs next year. It's an arms race with no finish line. Every brand that gets louder forces every rival to get louder still, until the whole environment is just noise. And the only escape is to be the one calm voice in a screaming room, which is its own expensive strategy. The next time something online makes you irrationally angry, ask who profited from your attention. Usually someone did, and usually they planned it down to the color of the button. The second force, and this one cuts deeper: trust. Attention gets you noticed, but attention is cheap and getting cheaper. Trust is what converts a glance into a purchase, and trust does not scale the way attention does. You can buy 1 billion impressions before breakfast. You cannot buy a single ounce of genuine belief. You can only earn it slowly and lose it instantly. This is why a brand spends 30 years building reputation and 1 afternoon destroying it with a single lie, a single recall it tried to hide, a single email that leaks. A century-old carmaker can lose more value in a week of headlines about cheating an emissions test than it earned in a decade of careful advertising, because the test wasn't really about emissions. It was about whether the words on the box could be believed at all. And once that question enters a customer's head, it never fully leaves, and the consequence reaches right into your week. It's why the company that underpromises and overdelivers quietly wins, while the one that overpromises wins once and never sees you again. And that one lost customer doesn't leave quietly. They tell 9 other people, which means the broken promise isn't 1 lost sale, it's 10. The most valuable thing a business can have is not your attention today. It's your assumption that they won't betray you tomorrow. And then there's the third force, the one that ties the other 2 together: meaning. This is the strange one, the one that separates a commodity from a cult. People do not buy products, they buy better versions of themselves. Nobody needs a particular brand of running shoe to run. They buy the shoe that makes them feel like the kind of person who runs at dawn while everyone else sleeps. A motorcycle company in America has customers who tattoo the logo on their arms, which no rational person does for a transportation device. They're not tattooing a vehicle. They're tattooing an identity, a rebellion, a self they want to be. The same logic runs through a phone company whose customers will queue overnight, in the rain, for a device only marginally different from last year's. They are not standing in line for a faster processor. They are standing in line to be seen standing in line, to belong to a tribe that values a certain kind of taste. The queue itself is the product. And the second-order consequence is the entire luxury economy. It's why the same leather, cut the same way in the same factories, sells for $40 or $4,000, depending on the 4 letters stamped on it. But it goes further. Once meaning is the product, the company becomes a hostage to it, because the moment the brand stands for something its customers no longer want to be, no discount on earth can save it. You're not paying for the bag, you're paying for what carrying it says, and the day it says the wrong thing, you'll abandon it overnight. The next time you feel loyal to a brand, notice it isn't really the product you're loyal to. It's the story about yourself that the product lets you tell. Attention, trust, meaning. Get someone to notice, get them to believe, give them something to mean. Every campaign in history, every logo, every jingle stuck in your head is some combination of those 3. That's the whole field, compressed into 3 words you'll still have tomorrow. You now understand why marketing is not advertising, but the entire decision of what to make and for whom, the marketing concept that reversed the arrow from make, then sell, to find out, then make. The 4 Ps and Lauterborn's flip of them into the customer's chair, and the 3 forces, attention, trust, and meaning, that every campaign on earth is built from. That's 4 years of a marketing degree. The frameworks, the ruptures, the uncomfortable truth that the customer was the point all along. In 20 minutes, skip the degree. Marketing, in the end, is not the study of how to sell things. It's the study of what people want when they think nobody's watching, and the slightly unsettling discovery that wanting is something you can map, anticipate, and stand in front of at exactly the right moment. The best marketers never made anyone want anything. They just learned to listen more carefully than the rest of us bothered to. The product was always a mirror, held at just the right angle. And the strangest part is that the mirror works even when you know it's a mirror. You can see the whole machine and still reach for the thing that makes you feel like someone. They were just the first to notice you were looking. So here's a thought to carry out the door. You now know the difference between attention and trust, between a product and the meaning wrapped around it. That makes you a slightly harder person to sell to, and a slightly sharper one when it's your turn to do the selling. Every discipline we compress here leaves you with a new lens, and the lenses stack. Subscribe and keep stacking them. The next one changes how you see something you've looked at your whole life.